In the long sweep of Roman history, a story stretching across centuries of triumph, treachery, and transformation. Certain names loom so large they become legends. Caesar, Augustus, Cicero. But today, you'll walk the roads of a man whose name once echoed across Rome's marble halls and wind-blown frontiers, then vanished from the lips of empire. A man who reshaped the Roman military, stood at the heart of a brewing political storm, and clawed his way from obscurity to power again and again. This is the story of Gaius Marius, farmer's son, military genius, 7-time consul, and architect of a new Rome. You may not know his name, but his legacy still echoes in the foundations of Western warfare, politics, and ambition. Over the course of this video, we will trace Marius's path, from dusty Arpinum fields to bloodied plains in Gaul, from the backbenches of the Senate to the desperate defense of the city itself. You'll meet allies who became enemies, enemies who became corpses, and choices that reshaped Rome's destiny. We begin, not in a palace, but in the rocky hills of Latium. Segment 1. The Outsider. Imagine yourself in the mid-2nd century BCE. The Roman Republic stands like a colossus astride the Mediterranean world. Victories in the Punic Wars have brought it new wealth and new tensions. Senators parade through marble colonnades. Slaves whisper in the shadows of villas, and in the small, unassuming town of Arpinum, over 100 kilometers from the capital, a boy is born into a world that doesn't want him. Gaius Marius was no patrician. He wasn't born into wealth, nor bred for politics. He came from the equestrian class, respectable but unremarkable. His family farmed the rugged land near Arpinum. It was a town granted Roman citizenship just decades before, and though proud, its sons were outsiders in the halls of Rome. Young Marius grew up where the soil was thin and the work was constant. It was a life of blistered hands, sun-scorched skin, and discipline carved by necessity. This hard edge would follow him into every room he entered, from barracks to Senate chambers. Yet, even from these humble origins, something burned brighter in Marius. He enlisted in the Roman army around age 20, and that's where things began to change. Marius, the soldier in the legions, Marius thrived. He wasn't noble, but he was ferociously capable. Discipline, strength, courage. More than anything, he had that Roman quality the historians would call virtues. Valor, yes, but also excellence. Purpose, an unrelenting drive to rise. It was during Rome's war against Numidia, a North African kingdom, that his talents drew attention. At the time, the campaign was being led by Quintus Caecilius Metellus, a patrician of the old school. And under him, Marius served with distinction. Metellus saw a promise in this tough, provincial officer. But Marius wanted more than praise. He wanted power. And here we glimpse something new, ambition that would not wait for the Senate's blessing. Breaking into Roman politics, in 119 BCE, Marius was elected tribune of the plebs, a crucial stepping stone. His time in office was marked by a clash with the elite. He backed a law to make voting fairer by limiting the Senate's manipulation, a move that angered the aristocracy. He wasn't trying to burn the system down. Not yet, but the tremors were beginning. By 115 BCE, Marius had climbed to the post of praetor, then governed a small province in Spain. It was here, in the quiet forests and rebellious hill villages, that Marius honed a key part of his legacy. Logistics. He streamlined supply chains, punished corruption, made the legions move with a new kind of order. But ambition doesn't rest long in the provinces. Marriage into power. When Marius returned to Rome, he took an unexpected step. He married Julia, from the family of the Julii Caesars. Yes, that family. the one that would eventually produce Julius Caesar himself. The Julii were blue-blooded aristocrats. The marriage shocked many. Why would they link their lineage to a coarse soldier from Arpenium? Because Marius was no longer just a soldier. He was becoming a force. The Jugurthine War, it is here, in the savage campaign against Jugurtha, the king of Numidia, that Marius's true breakout would occur. Jugurtha was no common rebel. He had fought under Roman banners and learned their politics and warfare intimately. He had bribed senators, tricked generals, and turned the war into a political embarrassment for Rome. Marius, frustrated under Metellus's command, petitioned the Senate for independent command. He claimed he could finish what the patricians could not. Against the odds, the people listened. In 107 BCE, Marius was elected consul, a post previously unthinkable for a man of his birth. He returned to Numidia with a new army, and a new vision for what Rome's legions could be. Before Marius, the Roman military was limited to landowning citizens, men who could afford their own armor and weapons. Marius opened recruitment to the poor, promising them arms, armor, food, and, crucially, land upon retirement. This was the Marian reforms, and it changed everything. Suddenly, Rome's armies were full of professional soldiers, men who owed their loyalty not to the Senate, but to their general, to Marius. The consequences would echo for generations. In North Africa, Marius pursued Jugurtha with relentless focus. His subordinate, a young and calculating noble named Lucius Cornelius Sulla, would play a key role. It was Sulla who finally captured Jugurtha, a detail that would fester into a bitter rivalry. The war ended. Marius returned victorious. But peace would not last. Rome had more enemies waiting beyond its borders. And now, it had a new kind of soldier. Segment 2. The invincible consul. While Marius basked in the glory of his African victory, the winds from the north began to howl. It wasn't just cold air sweeping across the Alps. It was people, entire nations. The Cimbri and the Teutones, two massive migrating tribes, were descending southward, not raiding, at first, moving, searching, but wherever they passed, devastation followed. 105 BCE. Disaster at Arezzo. At the Battle of Arezzo, Roman arrogance collided headfirst with reality. Two commanders, one a patrician senator, the other a people's general, refused to cooperate. Their feud tore command apart. The result was catastrophic. Over 80,000 Roman soldiers lost. One of the worst defeats in Roman history. The Republic had not faced such destruction since the days of Hannibal. Panic gripped the city. The Senate turned, once again, to Marius. And this time, he would not be refused. The 5-time consul in an unprecedented move, Marius was elected consul in 104 BCE, and then again the next year, and the next. 5 times in a row, the Republic, famous for its laws, checks, and annual turnover, handed the reins to one man. Some saw it as necessity, others as the beginning of monarchy in all but name. But Marius didn't spend his time in the forum. He was in the field, building a new kind of army to face an existential threat. Training Rome's first professional legion, the men who now filled Rome's ranks were not landowners. They were landless, poor, often desperate. For them, the army was not duty, it was survival. Marius trained them rigorously, emphasizing unit cohesion, discipline, and mobility. He eliminated bulky baggage trains and introduced the Marius mules, soldiers who carried their own gear, tools, and rations. This made Roman armies faster, leaner, and more They marched not for Rome, but for Marius, and soon he would lead them to one of the greatest military achievements in Republican history. The Battle of Aquae Sextiae, 100 to BCE. The Teutones, tall, fierce, and confident, after years of terrorizing Roman borders, approached Marius's position. He did not meet them head-on. Instead, he built his camp carefully, choosing high ground. For days, he let them march past, watched them jeer, waited until they were stretched and vulnerable. Then, with calculated fury, he struck. Marius attacked their rear with a hidden force, while the main body slammed into the Teutonic column. The result was utter annihilation. Over 100,000 Teutones killed or captured. Their king was paraded through Rome in chains. The people hailed Marius as a savior. But the work was not yet done. The Battle of Vercellae, 101 BCE. A year later, the Cimbri crossed the Alps and descended into northern Italy. This time, they faced Marius and a co-consul, Quinctus Lutatius Catulus. The two armies met near the Cimbri were brave, organized, not savages, but skilled warriors. Yet Marius had honed an elite killing machine. When the two sides clashed on the dry plains, the sun beat down on iron and blood. Rome emerged victorious. Again, the scale was staggering. Tens of thousands of Cimbri lay dead. Their threat, which had hung over the Republic for over a decade, was ended. Marius the hero. Rome had never known a general like him. A man who rose not through bloodlines, but through brilliance. A man who defeated one of the greatest threats to the Republic since its founding. A man elected consul 7 times. The people called him the third founder of Rome, after Romulus and Camillus. But power, once tasted, rarely retreats willingly. And Marius's triumph would not end in peace. He returned to a Rome simmering with political tension. The old aristocracy despised his reforms, his rise, and his crude manners. He spoke poorly, dressed plainly. He was not one of them. And now, without an enemy on the frontier, Rome would turn inward. Segment 3. Civil War and Shadows. The enemies had been defeated. The armies had returned. The triumphs were celebrated. But Rome was unraveling. When the fires of foreign war died down, the embers of internal division often flare. Gaius Marius, once hailed as Rome's savior, now stood at the edge of a different kind of battlefield, one made not of open plains and foreign kings, but of senate chambers, betrayal, and a city devouring itself. The rise of Sulla during the Jugatine War. Marius had relied on an ambitious subordinate, Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Aristocratic, brilliant, patient. Sulla had been the one to negotiate Jugurtha's capture. And though Marius claimed the glory, Sulla never forgot. As Marius continued to gather honors, Sulla began collecting allies. The Senate, increasingly wary of Marius's populist support, found Sulla a useful counterbalance. A man of noble stock, but with the cunning of a serpent. And so the seed of civil war was planted, not in a clash of swords, but in whispers and pride. Rome in turmoil. The social war 91-08 8 BC, but before ambitions could explode, Rome faced a new crisis. From within its Italian allies, for generations, the Socii Rome's Italian allies had fought and bled beside Roman legions. But they were denied full citizenship, denied the vote, denied a voice. In 91 BCE, tensions boiled over. The social war began, a brutal fratricidal conflict where towns that once supplied legions now raised arms against the Republic. Marius, now in his late 60s, returned to command briefly. But it was clear. His time on the battlefield was ending. His body aged, his energy fading. Sulla, meanwhile, rose like a star. By the war's end, Rome had granted citizenship to most of Italy, not from generosity, but from exhaustion. And the spotlight shifted definitively. The Mithridatic command 88 BCE. Then came a crisis that would ignite civil war. In the east, King Mithridates, the sixth of Pontus, had launched a violent rebellion. He swept through Roman Asia, massacring tens of thousands of Roman citizens. Panic gripped the Republic. The Senate turned to Sulla, now consul, to lead the campaign. It was a natural choice. But Marius had other plans. Using his influence with the popular assembly, Marius had the command transferred to himself. A direct assault on senatorial authority. It was more than politics. It was a declaration of war. Sulla responded with something Rome had never seen. The March on Rome in 88 BCE, Lucius Cornelius Sulla marched on Rome with his own legions. It was unthinkable, forbidden, blasphemous. No general had ever crossed the Pomerium, the sacred boundary of the city, with an army, but Sulla did. And Rome fell without a fight. Marius fled, old, disgraced, exiled. He wandered the Italian coast, hunted like an animal, captured once, and spared only because a lowly slave refused to execute him. Paralyzed by the general's fierce glare, he escaped, found refuge in Africa, looked back across the sea at the city he had once ruled, and waited. Marius returns 87 BCE. The pendulum swung once more, while Sulla marched east to confront Mithridates. His enemies back in Rome regrouped. The consul Cinna, a Marius sympathizer, was expelled by the Senate. Riots erupted. Marius returned, not quietly, but at the head of an army. Gaunt, weathered, but still a master of strategy. What followed was a purge. Senators and equestrians who had supported Sulla were executed. Their bodies lined the streets, heads mounted on spears outside the Senate. This was not the Marius of Acqui Sixtiae. This was a man unforgiving, paranoid, and burning with revenge. And then, just as suddenly, it ended. Death of Marius, 86 BCE. In 86 BCE, Gaius Marius was elected consul. For the 7th time. Days later, he was dead. Some say it was pneumonia, others a stroke. Perhaps it was simply the weight of years, of loss, of blood. He died not in exile, not in disgrace, but in power. The farmer's son from Arpinum had risen higher than anyone thought possible, and in doing so, set fire to the Republic itself. Segment 4. The Legacy of Marius in Death. Marius left no memoirs, no final address, no son in his image to inherit his glory. But he did leave something far more powerful. He left a blueprint, a way for outsiders to break through Rome's oldest walls, a model for using soldiers not as servants of the Republic, but as clients of a man. He had reshaped the army, the consulship, the very expectations of what a Roman leader could be. And while his own hands had dropped the torch, others would soon pick it up and run with it toward a much darker future. A military revolution before Marius, a Roman soldier served for a campaign, then returned home to farm. His loyalty was to the Senate. His identity was rooted in land, family, tradition. After Marius, the soldier became a profession. He marched for years, sometimes decades. He carried everything on his back. He trained relentlessly. He was loyal not to Rome, but to his general, who paid him, fed him, and promised land in return. This transformation gave Rome the most powerful fighting force the ancient world had ever seen. It also gave birth to civil war, imperialism, and eventually empire. Caesar and the Marian lineage. There's a reason Caesar never distanced himself from Marius. Despite the Senate's discomfort, they were family. Caesar's aunt was Marius's wife. As a boy, Caesar would have watched Marius rise, fall, and rise again. And he learned how to command legions, how to defy the Senate, how to use the people as a counterweight to the aristocracy. Where Marius reformed the military, Caesar would use it to destroy the Republic entirely. But the resemblance ran deeper. Both men were charismatic, unorthodox, both blended military genius with political shrewdness, and both knew that the Roman system could not contain ambition forever. The cycle continues. Marius versus Sulla. Echoes. The rivalry between Marius and Sulla was not just personal, it was archetypal. Marius represented the populares, champions of the people, reformers, radicals. Sulla embodied the optimates, defenders of tradition, senatorial privilege, the old order. That same tension would erupt again in Caesar versus Pompey, then again in Octavian versus Mark Antony, and again, long after the Republic had been replaced by emperors, and emperors by ambition cloaked in robes. Marius wasn't the last of his kind. He was the first. Historical reputation, villain, hero, or architect. How do we remember Gaius Marius? To his enemies, he was a brute, a peasant in armor, unrefined, vengeful, hungry for power. To his supporters, he was a man of the people, a leader forged by merit, not blood. To modern historians, he is something else entirely, a hinge on which the Republic turned. He didn't plan to destroy the Republic. He wasn't a revolutionary in the modern sense. But through necessity, innovation, and ambition, he unlocked forces Rome could no longer control. And once the doors had opened, no one could close them. Rome, after Marius died before seeing the final unraveling, before Sulla's dictatorship, before Caesar crossed the Rubicon, before Augustus crowned himself emperor in all but name. But those events were already set in motion, pulled along by the inertia of Marius's choices. His reforms made the legions unstoppable. His example made autocracy imaginable. His shadow stretched into centuries. He is not remembered with marble arches or golden statues, but he remains etched into Roman memory like a scar, painful, permanent, and profoundly important. He was of no noble house, but noble in ambition. And in Rome, that proved to be enough. Conclusion. The man who reforged Rome in every generation. Rome tested its limits of power, of virtue, of endurance. And in Gaius Marius, it found a man willing to go further than any who came before. He was not beloved like Caesar. He was not deified like Augustus. But he was the prototype. The man who cracked open the armor of the Republic and revealed what was festering inside. If Rome was reborn in empire, then Gaius Marius was its midwife. And history, though slow to name him, has not forgotten.